If I asked you to predict the future of a country, I mean, I'm not talking about next week's weather. I'm talking about the really big stuff.
Right, the macroeconomic trends.
Yeah, exactly. Like, will its economy crash in 2040? Will there be some kind of social revolution? Will real estate prices completely tank or just skyrocket?
You'd probably go look at the stock market for that.
That is where most people look. Or, maybe you doom scroll through political polls.
Which is honestly looking in the wrong place entirely.
It really is. Because the documents we're looking at today for this deep dive suggest that if you really want to see the future, you don't need a crystal ball.
No, you definitely don't.
You don't need a tarot deck. And you certainly don't need to read tea leaves. You basically just need a specific type of graph. A graph that, frankly, looks a little bit like a Christmas tree.
Well, or a beehive, or a cup. It kind of really depends on the country you're looking at.
We're definitely going to get to the cup later. But anyway, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are digging into a fascinating, if, let's be real, slightly dense set of documents titled The Architecture of Demographic Analysis.
Which sounds incredibly dry. I mean, it sounds like something you read to cure insomnia.
It does. It sounds exactly like homework.
And it technically is AP Human Geography Topic 2.3, so for some of you listening, it literally is your homework.
Sure.
But for everyone else, you can kind of think of this as a cheat code. It's
Yeah.
a cheat code for understanding how human societies actually function under the hood.
And that is exactly our mission today. We're going to unpack how the specific ingredients of a society, and we are strictly talking about age and sex here, how those determine its destiny.
It is pretty wild.
It's wild to me that just two simple data points, when you aggregate them across millions of people, they can literally tell you if a nation's about to boom or completely bust.
Right, because it's the fundamental tool for geographers. I mean, anyone can count heads.
The census does that.
Exactly. A census tells you how many people are in a country, but that's just a raw number. It doesn't tell you the story. What we're analyzing today is population composition, which tells you the structure of those people.
And structure is destiny.
It really is.
So let's break down this structure. The source material highlights two primary ingredients that make up basically every population analysis. Ingredient number one is age.
Right. But in demographics, we don't just look at age as a continuous number.
Like, we don't just say the average age is 35.
No, because that's not very helpful.
Yeah.
We break it down into what the text calls cohorts.
Now, cohort is one of those words I hear in, marketing meetings, usually followed by millennials or Gen Z. But it means something a bit more specific here, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. A cohort is basically just a fancy way of grouping people who share a common characteristic. And in this context, it's their age range.
So how do they group them?
Usually, geographers group them in 5-year bands. So the 0 to 4-year-olds are one cohort, the 5 to 9s are the next cohort, and so on.
But why does grouping them matter so much? Why not just say, hey, we have a generally young population?
Because averages lie. I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. If you have a room full of kindergartners and a bunch of retirees, the average age of that room might be 40.
Right.
But the number 40 tells you absolutely nothing about the actual needs of the people in that room. Cohorts let you see the waves.
The waves of people.
Yeah. If you have a massive cohort of young people, say everyone under 15, that signifies a very, very specific future.
It signifies I should probably invest in sneaker companies.
I mean, ideally, yes. But for a government planner, it's a flashing warning light. It means rapid growth is happening right now.
So they have to prepare.
Exactly. It means you have a ticking clock, you have to build schools, you need to train pediatricians, and eventually, and this is the big one, you have to create millions of entry-level jobs.
Because if you fail to do that,
That youth bulge can lead to massive unemployment, and usually that leads straight to social unrest.
right, because you have all these highly energized young people with absolutely nothing to do.
Exactly.
Whereas if the cohorts are top-heavy, like if you have a ton of people over 75, the entire script just flips.
Completely flips. And now you aren't building playgrounds anymore. You're building nursing homes. You're shifting from an economy of rapid growth to an economy of maintenance.
You aren't worried about youth riots. You're worried about funding pensions.
Precisely.
Okay, so that's ingredient one, age. Which brings us to ingredient number two, which is
Sex.
simply the ratio of males to females in the population.
Now, this is actually where I got a bit stuck in the reading. I kind of just assumed this would be 50-50 everywhere. Nature flips a coin, right? Heads it's a boy, tails it's a girl.
You would think so.
But the data in the source says it's way more complicated than that.
It is. Nature does flip a coin, but it's actually a weighted coin. This is a really fascinating biological nuance that the source points out. The human species naturally produces about 105 males for every 100 females at birth. Wait, really? So men are basically overrepresented right out of the gate.
At birth, yes. Nature seems to anticipate that males are historically more expendable, for lack of a better term. They're more prone to early mortality.
Through what? Risk-taking behavior.
Risk-taking, war, or even just a higher susceptibility to certain genetic diseases. So the biological logic is that you start with extra men, and by the time that cohort reaches age 30 or 40, the ratio usually evens out to a perfect 100 to 100.
Wow. It's nature's way of building in a buffer.
Exactly. But the documents show that this natural balance gets completely warped depending on where you look. And this brings up a key concept called the scale of analysis.
Right. The difference between looking at the entire world versus looking at one specific town.
Right. If you look at the whole planet, it roughly matches the biology. It's about 101 males to 100 females globally. But if you zoom in on a specific region, say Europe,
It flips.
it completely flips. It's 95 males to 100 females,
Is that because the men there are dying younger?
partly. But it's heavily driven by healthcare. Better healthcare allows women, who biologically tend to live longer than men anyway, to survive well into their 80s and 90s.
So in a developed region like Europe, the grandmother cohorts are just massive compared to the grandfather cohorts.
Exactly. But then you swing the map over to China or India or parts of the Middle East, and it swings back the other way drastically, like
Huh.
105 males to 100 females overall, not just at birth, but across the whole population.
Which is definitely not biological. That feels very intentional.
It is intentional. It's what geographers call the scars of history showing up in the data. Migration, war, government policy, they all leave a very distinct fingerprint on that sex ratio.
Like the migration of workers.
Yeah, for example, in some Middle Eastern countries with high guest worker populations, you might see a ratio of 150 men to 100 women because young men move there specifically for construction jobs.
That makes total sense. You can literally see the economy reflected in the gender balance. Now, we're definitely going to deep dive into that China number in a minute because that is basically a horror story disguised as a statistic.
It really is.
But first, I want to talk about the tool itself. We've got age, we've got sex. How do geographers actually visualize this data? Because looking at a spreadsheet with thousands of rows is just impossible to comprehend.
Right, which is why we use the population pyramid.
I love these things. They're oddly satisfying to look at.
Yeah.
For you listening right now, maybe driving or working out, I want you to try and visualize a graph in your head.
Okay, so picture a vertical line right down the middle of the page. That vertical line is your y-axis. It shows all those age cohorts we just talked about.
So babies are at the bottom.
Babies at the bottom, and centenarians, the people over 100 years old, are way up at the top.
And then the horizontal line is the sex ratio.
Correct. By convention, geographers always put the males on the left side of that center spine and females on the right side. So you have these horizontal bars sticking out from the center.
And the length of the bar shows you exactly how many people are in that specific group.
Exactly. So if you have millions of 5-year-old boys, the bar at the very bottom left sticks out really far. And when you stack all those bars up from age 0 to 100, they form a distinct shape.
A silhouette.
Yes. And that silhouette is arguably the most powerful predictive tool a government has at its disposal.
It's essentially a time machine, isn't it?
It really is a time machine.
Yeah.
Because people age at a completely predictable rate, 1 year per year.
Big if true. Science finally confirms it.
I know, shocking. But think about the actual implication of that. If you look at a pyramid and you see a massive bulge at the very bottom, let's say the 0 to 5 cohort is just huge. For an absolute fact that in exactly 20 years, that exact same bulge is going to hit the labor market.
You don't have to guess.
Not at all. You know what the housing demand will be in 30 years. You can literally see a baby boom moving up the chart over time, like a mouse moving through a snake.
Okay, that is a very vivid, slightly disturbing image, but it helps visualize it. You just track a generation as they age by watching that wide bulge move up the y-axis.
Exactly. And you can see the gaps, too. Like, if there was a major war 40 years ago where a lot of young men died in combat, you will see a literal dent on the male side of the pyramid.
And that dent just moves up every year.
Until that generation eventually passes away, yes.
So it's a history book and a crystal ball all rolled into one. But this brings us to the inevitable question of money. Because the source material introduces a concept that sounds frankly, incredibly stressful. The dependency ratio.
It is stressful. This is basically the pressure gauge of a society. It tells you exactly how hard the working people have to work just to keep the country afloat.
Walk us through the math here. How do we actually calculate this pressure?
So you divide the entire population into two teams. Team 1 is the productive segment. This is your working age population, which the source generally defines as everyone between the ages of 15 and 64.
Okay, so the people paying taxes, the economic engine.
Right. Then you have Team 2, which is the dependents. These are the people who are generally not economically productive. That's the kids under 15 who are still in school, and the elderly over 65 who have officially retired.
And the formula in the text is the number of dependents divided by the working age population, and then you multiply that by 100.
Correct. That gives you your ratio.
So if I'm understanding this math right, a high number is bad.
A high number indicates a very heavy societal burden. It means you have a relatively small group of actual workers trying to financially support a massive group of non-workers.
And that support happens through, what, school taxes, Social Security?
School taxes, Social Security, exploding healthcare costs, and even just direct physical caretaking.
Wow. This is quite literally the sandwich generation problem, just expressed as a national math equation.
Precisely. If you are in that middle working block and the dependency ratio is high, you are being intensely squeezed from both sides. You're paying for your kids' college or braces on one end, and you're supporting your elderly parents' medical bills on the other.
Okay, so what happens if you have a low ratio?
That is the economic sweet spot. Geographers often call it the demographic dividend. It usually happens when birth rates suddenly fall, so you have way fewer kids to pay for, but your current workforce is still really massive because the previous generation was large.
So you have piles of money and fewer people you actually have to spend it on.
Exactly. It's an economic party. But as we all know, parties eventually end because those workers, they eventually get old themselves.
And if they didn't have very many kids.
The ratio suddenly flips on you, and the demographic hangover is absolutely brutal.
Which feels like the absolute perfect transition to our case study from the source. We mentioned earlier that severely skewed sex ratio in China, 105 men to 100 women. And we talked about how government policy can warp these pyramids.
Yes, this is probably the most famous and consequential demographic experiment in human history, the one-child policy.
Set the scene for us here. Why did they actually do it? I feel like people forget the historical context.
Well, it's the 1970s. China's population is absolutely exploding. The government looks at their population projections and they get terrified.
Terrified of what, exactly?
They fear they are going to literally eat themselves out of existence.
Yeah.
That the sheer population growth will outstrip the national food supply and the entire country will collapse into mass famine.
So they intervene. Hard. One family, one child.
And if you only look at the raw numbers, it worked. It stopped the population explosion. The policy prevented roughly 400 million births. But demographics is a lot like a water balloon. If you squeeze one part really hard, it just bulges somewhere else in a way you probably didn't expect.
Right. The source explicitly highlights these unintended consequences, and they are pretty tragic.
First, you have the sex ratio. Because there was such a strong cultural preference for male children who carry the family name and traditionally care for aging parents, female fetuses were frequently aborted or baby girls were simply abandoned.
Because families felt they only had one chance, so they wanted their one chance to be a boy.
Exactly.
And that's how you end up with that massive stat, 105 men to 100 women.
And honestly, it's actually worse if you look at certain specific age cohorts. In some distinct birth years, it's closer to 115 boys to every 100 girls.
That is staggering.
It created a situation where today there are roughly 30 to 40 million Chinese men who are statistically guaranteed to never find a female partner. They actually call them bare branches.
That's incredibly sad. And socially dangerous, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
You have tens of millions of men with absolutely no family prospects.
Extremely dangerous. But then you have to look at the age structure consequence. Because the birth rate dropped so incredibly fast, the base of China's population pyramid just vanished. They went from having a very wide base to a very narrow one, almost overnight in demographic terms.
Creating what geographers in the text call the 4-2-1 problem. This was the part of the source that really, truly blew my mind.
Right. This is the absolute nightmare scenario for the dependency ratio. Imagine this. You are the one. You are the only child in your family.
Right.
You have two aging parents that you are entirely responsible for supporting. And because your parents were also only children or close to it, you potentially have four aging grandparents to support as well.
So you have one single worker supporting 6 retirees.
That is the grim reality of the math. China is essentially getting old before it got rich. They are facing a future where the financial and social burden on the young is going to be completely crushing. It's a demographic trap, and it is very hard to escape.
It's amazing, in a dark way, how a single policy decision from 50 years ago is literally dictating the shape of the country today. It really shows that demographics is a very long game. You can't just turn this ship around quickly.
No, you really can't. Think about it. A baby born today does not enter the workforce for 20 years. There is a massive built-in lag time. You can't just fix a labor shortage overnight by telling people to have more kids.
So we've looked at the ingredients, the math, and the warning signs. Now, I want to do a little practical exercise for you listening. The source material outlines 4 very distinct shapes of population pyramids. I want to walk through these so you can learn to kind of read a country just by looking at its silhouette.
Let's do it. You can basically think of these as the 4 stages of a country's life cycle.
Scenario 1, the classic pyramid shape. A very wide base at the bottom that steadily gets narrow at the top. It basically looks like a triangle.
Right. This is the rapid growth model. A classic example in the world today would be the Democratic Republic of the Congo or Nigeria.
Wide base means lots of babies.
Tons of kids. The population is essentially doubling every few decades.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing for them?
It's high risk, high reward. The immediate implication is that the demand for food, basic education, and childcare is overwhelming. You are running as fast as you can just to keep up.
You literally have to build schools faster than you can pour the concrete.
Exactly. But if you can actually educate that massive young cohort and create jobs for them, you eventually get an enormous workforce that can power your economy for decades.
Okay, moving to scenario 2. The base is still wider than the top, but it's not flaring out at the bottom anymore. It looks a bit more restrained.
This is slow growth. Think of modern-day India or Mexico. The population is absolutely still growing, but the brakes have been tapped. The base is narrowing relative to the middle cohorts.
So the national challenge shifts.
Yes. The sheer panic about building thousands of elementary schools subsides. Now your government is focusing on building universities and generating complex jobs. You're entering that demographic dividend phase we talked about earlier.
More workers, fewer dependents. Got it. Which leads us to scenario 3. The source calls this one stable growth.
The shape here changes completely. It doesn't even look like a pyramid anymore. It looks much more like a column or maybe a beehive.
Yeah.
The width of the bars is pretty consistent from the babies all the way up to the 60-year-olds.
And the main example the text gives here is the United States.
Right. This represents 0 or near 0 natural growth. You have replacement level fertility. Basically, 2 parents are having 2 kids, keeping the numbers flat.
That sounds like the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah.
Total stability.
It is economically very comfortable. You don't have those wild, unpredictable swings in demand. The challenge is just maintaining the balance. But there is a huge catch here.
What's the catch?
The U.S. only maintains this stable column shape because of immigration. If you removed immigration from the data, the U.S. would look exactly like scenario 4.
Scenario 4.
Yeah.
The shape that looks completely upside down.
Yes, the declining population. The base of the graph is actually narrower than the middle and the top. It looks like a cup or a totally inverted pyramid.
And the poster child for this scenario is Germany.
Germany, Japan, Italy. This inverted shape is rapidly becoming the norm in the wealthy, developed world.
So the base is narrow, which means very few kids are being born.
Exactly. And the implication here is fascinating and frankly a bit scary. We spent the last 50 years terrified of overpopulation, right?
Oh yeah, the population bomb. We thought we were just going to run out of physical space.
Well, this is the exact opposite. This is underpopulation. You are facing a structurally shrinking society.
What does that actually look like on the ground? Is it just, empty playgrounds?
It starts with severe labor shortages. You have way more retirees leaving the factory or the office every single year than you have fresh graduates entering it. So the productive segment of that dependency ratio gets smaller and smaller.
But doesn't that mean wages go up? Because workers are scarce. That sounds pretty nice for the workers.
It might be temporarily, But your taxes go up too, because the national pension and healthcare costs are absolutely exploding, while the sheer number of taxpayers is shrinking. It creates a deflationary spiral.
Oh, I see.
Plus, innovation slows down because young people statistically tend to be the innovators and risk takers, and housing prices might crash.
Which sounds great for young buyers until you realize your house is your retirement nest egg and you were banking on selling it to fund your old age.
Exactly. It completely upends how our entire macroeconomic system works. Our whole system is built on the fundamental assumption that there will always be more people around next year to buy iPhones and rent apartments.
That really is the core assumption of modern capitalism, infinite growth.
And demographic analysis forcefully suggests that that assumption might be expiring. You simply cannot have infinite economic growth with a permanently shrinking population.
So, bringing this all back to you, the listener, why should someone listening to this on their morning commute actually care about the shape of a theoretical graph?
Because these tools have what the source explicitly calls diagnostic utility. They diagnose the long-term health of the exact society you live and work in.
Give me a very concrete example of how I could use this.
Okay, let's say you are 30 years old and you're planning your long-term career. If you look at your country's pyramid and see a massive bulging cohort of 60-year-olds, you know for a fact that the healthcare industry is going to absolutely boom for the next 20 years.
Because all those people will need care.
Exactly. That's a very safe bet. It's demographic destiny.
Or what if you're looking to buy a house?
Same thing. If you're living in a declining-shaped country like Japan, you might really want to think twice about treating real estate as a guaranteed investment. If there are literally fewer people alive every year, overall demand drops.
Which is why in rural Japan, they're literally giving houses away right now because there is no one left to live in them.
Exactly. It effectively determines the overall difficulty setting of your life. Will there be a labor shortage that gives you leverage to drive up your wages? Or a massive labor surplus that drives them down? Will the government have a pension waiting for you when you retire?
It allows for actual strategic planning. It's about not being blindsided by the inevitable, because the math is already written.
It is already written.
You know, I want to leave you with a final thought here. We've talked about these charts today, like they are the laws of physics, like gravity, just totally inevitable.
And in many ways they are. Once a generation is physically born, you can't really change its size.
But looking back at the China example, that was a human decision, a government policy choice that warped the graph. And now we look at places today like South Korea, where the birth rate is something like 0.7, way below replacement level. That's a cultural choice.
It is. It's a choice driven by the high cost of living, intense work culture, and shifting personal values.
The dependency ratio feels like a cold, hard math problem.
Yeah.
And we usually treat it like a political budget issue. You hear politicians say, oh, we just need to tax the rich more to pay for the elderly.
Sure, that's the standard political debate in every country right now.
But here is the question that really sticks with me after reading these sources. What happens when the core problem isn't money? What happens when a society simply runs out of people?
That is the real question.
Because a government can print money. They do it all the time.
Huh.
But you cannot print 20-year-olds.
No, you certainly cannot. And that is the exact cliff edge that a lot of the developed world is walking toward right now. We're entering completely uncharted demographic territory.
Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for diving in with us.
Always a pleasure.